I keep a list. No, not a notebook. Nothing that organized. A running tally in my head of the moments a game stops trusting me to play it. A character who knows where I'm standing without ever being in the room. A wall that has yellow rocks so I don't have to look at it twice. A note on a desk that reads like it was written for an audience instead of a dying man's journal. This week, I wanted to talk about what it feels like when games ask you to feel something they haven't earned. This is that conversation. There's a difference between a character dying and a character's death meaning something, and most games still treat those as the same event. I bet you didn't see this coming. Destiny 2. Lightfall. An expansion so synonymous with players disliking the writing that to this day you can still find fans rewriting it to fix the narrative Bungie provided. One of my least favorite tropes in writing is the self-sacrifice. It's teetering on cringe for me. The character your narrative could have written out entirely and the story would have moved on just as well, except you could tell the moment a pixel of them showed up on screen that their destiny, pun be damned, was 6 feet down. Rohan, the no-nonsense mentor archetype, the type of person who knows exactly where they ought to be, dies in Lightfall. He's one of the last 2 Cloudstriders protecting Neomuna, alongside Nimbus, or as I like to call them, Nimrod, who I have my own complaints about. You see, Nimbus is the polar opposite of Rohan in every way that matters. No redeemable weight to them, a goofball who throws quips at you every other line. They're the last surviving member of an order whose mentor, whose boss, just died saving a stranger. In the moment that's supposed to land the hardest, they try to high-five Empress Keitel. We just killed her father, Callus. We, the player who spent almost a decade with that character, the Leviathan, the Menagerie, all of it, and on the second-to-last expansion of that decade of storytelling, a high five and a question about whatever the veil is what we got. Back to Rohan. I genuinely can't explain why it happens or why it needed to, not without looking it up. So instead, let's just watch, and you'll see what I mean.
Give me some time to expose its weak point. When I give you the signal, use your strand! Now's the time! Lightbearer! Destroy it now!
We can't.
Then I have no choice. Nimbus, see you on the other side. Rohan, what are you doing?
Rohan.
He chose a Cloudstrider's end. Hey, Guardian, can you please pick up his core? I'll need it.
Okay, Nimbus.
The Cloudstriders already live shortened lives by design, so the game has built in its own ticking clock before you've even met him properly. He sacrifices himself part-way through the campaign. The intended reaction is grief. The actual reaction, for most players I've talked to, and for me, was closer to a shrug. Wait, that was it? Not because the writing in that one scene was bad. It's more so that the time we get there just wasn't there at all. You can't grieve a stranger just because the music tells you to. And this leads into something broader than Rohan specifically. The game spends a decade telling you that you've killed gods and defied fate, and then treats you as anything but extraordinary the moment the narrative needs you to be small again. Rohan being there or not made no real difference to us. The game and the people writing it seemed to think it did. You could have put almost anyone in that role and the scene will play out almost the same. That's a habit, not a one-off. Destiny keeps finding small ways in the writing and in the mechanics both to walk back whatever chosen title it had handed you the expansion before. Mass Effect tried something more interesting, and for one game, it worked. The Vermeer Survivor. It was such a pivotal moment in the game, the first time I personally felt the game telling me this is what Mass Effect is going to be. You're given a choice, Ashley or Kaidan. You were only human crew members throughout the entire game. Kaidan, Alliance Navy, steady, the camaraderie of a lieutenant you trust. And Ashley, a grunt, the last surviving member of her own squad, with a hard-earned habit of distrusting anything that doesn't bleed red like she does. The choice has real emotional stakes because both of them know it's a one-way trip and Saren has to be stopped regardless. You choose, and you live with it for the rest of the game. That's until Mass Effect 2, where the choice suddenly stops mattering because you can't actually interact with the person you protected. The game's version of honoring your decision is parking the survivor in a hallway on one mission so you can have a nostalgic nod listening to them admonish you, the person who stood up to Saren and the Geth, just because you are now with Cerberus. And then it's back to shooting collectors. The investment was real. The follow-through wasn't. That's a different failure than Rohan's, and maybe a sadder one, because Mass Effect proved it knew how to earn the moment, and then declined to honor what it had earned. Gears 5 does something similar to Rohan on purpose. Near the end, you choose who survives between JD and Del, and the game wants that choice to settle into you. But neither of them had been given enough room to become a person you'd lose sleep over. The choice is structurally a tragedy, but emotionally, it's just a multiple choice question. JD is the son of Marcus. You were drawn to him before you even made the choice because you played an entire game as him in Gears 4. He's next in the Phoenix bloodline, a child Marcus and Anya made sure could exist at the expense of Anya's life. It tracks that the story leans towards saving him. Del is the quirky tech of the group, the way Baird was, and he also tries to be Dom too. The steady best friend who's just there, without ever getting the time Dom actually got. There were no stakes built under him. Gears 5 is Kate's story. She's tied to Mira, to the Locust, to a hell of a personal mess. Del exists alongside that mess without ever becoming a part of it. I don't know why he's a Gear, I don't know why he and JD are close, I know he does what's required of him, and that's a description that fits any soldier in any squad you've ever played as. It's not specific to Del, and that's the problem. Compare all of this to Dom. Dom's grief runs across multiple Gears games before it actually pays off. You watch him search for his wife for years of in-game time. You watch what that search does to him, the way it hollows him out little by little in every cutscene that he's in. The game's taught you over and over that you don't fight alone. Dom is the first person you see. Dom broke you out of that cell. Dom was with you every step of the way through increasingly bad odds. But there's only so much one man can absorb. By the time he sacrifices himself in Gears of War 3, you're not losing a plot point. That was your friend. The death isn't an emotional moment at that point. It's just the bill for time that was already spent. Noble Team does the same thing differently, and in one game no less. George, Kat, Carter, Emil. Halo Reach spends real time making each of them distinct before it starts killing them off. So every death lands with its own specific weight instead of one generic note played 5 times. Kat's death works because the franchise had already taught you, through its own mythology, that Spartans are close to invincible. One of them, the Master Chief, could single-handedly hold off a genocide. Imagine what 100 of him could do. But then Reach happens, and Cat gets taken off the board in a single second. No warning, no fanfare either. That's not even manufactured grief. The opening cinematic tells you exactly what's going to happen to this team. How you get there anyway is some of the best writing a first-person shooter has ever managed. Character plus death does not equal emotion. Character plus time plus investment equals emotion. Death is just the receipt. Without the investment first, it's a receipt for a purchase you have never made. Stepping away from unearned death. Destiny 2's opening campaign, The Red War, doesn't waste time. Gaul, leader of the Red Legion, traps the Traveler and severs every guardian in the city from their light in the first act, you included. You get thrown off his ship for good measure. Powerless, you crawl out of that wreckage of a city that just lost everything. And the only reason you get your abilities back before anyone else is a broken shard of the Traveler sitting just outside in the European dead zone, far from where the rest of the population is fighting and dying with nothing. The story still wants to read that as you being uniquely capable of reclaiming your light, the paracausal force behind everything that you can do. The cutscenes lean on it, and then you step into any social space in the game and watch 100 other Guardians use the exact light abilities you were just told only you specifically were capable of getting back. This isn't a complaint, about players existing. Multiplayer games need other players, of course. The complaint is much more narrow than that. The story keeps talking as if you're alone in a crowded room, and the room keeps proving it wrong. And I'll say it again. This is not a multiplayer problem. Most MMOs carry some version of this. You're the Guardian, the Warrior of Light, the Chosen One. Titles built to feel singular, handed to every single person who logs in. The issue was never the multiplayer structure. Plenty of games make peace with that. The issue is wanting the prestige of being chosen while refusing to write around the fact that everyone in the server got the same letter. And then the contradiction. The game wants me to feel like the one, in quotes. The mechanics around me are constantly proving I'm one of thousands. You can't have both, well, not honestly. And most of these stories don't even try to reconcile it. They just hope you won't notice the other Guardian standing 6 feet away using the exact ability you were told only you could reclaim. This isn't something you fix retroactively, unless you're willing to retcon some narrative threads later, of course. But I'd like writers to sit with it a little longer than they have been. What good is telling me I'm the guy while standing next to a dozen other guys who are clearly just as capable? We call these games massively multiplayer, then a cutscene plays and my fire team, the people who were standing next to me in the mission 30 seconds earlier, simply isn't there. The cutscene forgets their bravery, their stakes, their capability like they were never in the room. The only MMO I've seen do this properly is Star Wars, The Old Republic. Your party actually appears in the cutscene with you. They can participate in the dialogue. There's even a system for a party member to show up on screen even when they're somewhere else in the world. It's a small thing mechanically. However, it changes everything about whether the fiction believes it has other players in it. Halo 3 at least got partway there. When you play the campaign in co-op, every cutscene keeps both the Master Chief and the Arbiter on screen together. The story doesn't pretend your partner isn't there. That's more than most games even bother with, and the fact that it felt remarkable then, and still feels remarkable now, tells you something about how little has changed. There's a term players reach for to wave this off. Suspension of disbelief. It's a video game. It's fine. I think that's a deflection more than an answer, and I'd honestly call it an oversight. And a significant one at that, but a fixable one. MMOs in general could stand to acknowledge a little more often that a player might have a friend, or even a stranger, standing right next to them for the story's biggest moments, and that the story should know it. I got into Final Fantasy properly over the past few months, dear viewer. My community had been playing Final Fantasy XIV, and I picked up Gunbreaker, tanking my way through dungeons with the authority of a field commander and the elegance of a half-eaten Cinnabon. I asked around what I should start with if I wanted to actually understand what the deal with this franchise is. Everyone unanimously said 10. How it deals with belief, duty, tradition, and simply doing what needs to be done. It's a story that resonated with me, and I'm glad I started there. As a narrator, I have a tendency to overanalyze narrative structure, so bear with me. Final Fantasy X spends its first half convincing you that sin is a genuine civilization-shaping threat. You see what it's done to the world. You meet people who've organized their entire culture around fear of it. Sin tears an entire village apart in front of you. A joint task force with the Albed gets obliterated, and you walk the carnage of that beach yourself. See the devastation firsthand. The game earns that dread honestly, which is part of what makes the back half so strange. Once you get the airship, the story keeps insisting the world is ending, while the game hands you the means to do anything but stop it. Race chocobos, dodge lightning bolts on a beach for an accessory nobody needs, and play blitzball. You can also farm celestial weapons across optional dungeons that take longer than the main story did to even get to that point. The narrative says we have to stop sin immediately, and the game design says take your time. There's a tournament. This isn't unique to Final Fantasy X, it's nearly every open-world game with a ticking clock plot stapled onto a sandbox that doesn't tick. My family's in danger, adventurer, do something. The dragons are invading, quickly, you must slay them. The kingdom is collapsing, you must send word to the neighboring kingdom for aid. Cool. Anyway, I'm just gonna spend 40 hours gathering herbs and wandering into caves and fighting monsters nobody asked me to because the game has made it very clear that nothing bad will happen if I do. The problem isn't that side content exists. Honestly, I'd wager Skyrim or Fallout New Vegas wouldn't be nearly as fun if you couldn't wander off. Side content is most of why these games are worth playing. The fracture is somewhere else. The world never reacts to delay it's begging you to take. And once it stops reacting, the urgency stops being a fact about the world and becomes a costume the story is still wearing for no particular reason. If sin is truly an existential threat, trust me to remember that. Stop reminding me. Stop telling me the world is ending while simultaneously handing me reasons not to care. Either make the clock real, or stop pretending there is one. Picture this. I send you on a quest. retrieve the legendary greatsword resting in the pit below the village. It doesn't matter how I give you this quest. It's either magic, telepathy, whatever vitamin your mother gave you as a kid that you swore up and down did something. You accept. Why wouldn't you? There's a sword in it. You descend into the pit. Cavernous beasts wait below. Demons the size of Neptune. Puzzles built specifically to keep that greatsword tucked away until the right hero came looking for it. The kind of place that's supposed to feel like it's been waiting for you. Now, imagine I never stop talking the entire way down. There's a term I'd use for this if nobody else already has. The omniscient quest giver. Someone who can tell you within a second where you are, what you killed, what you just did, what to pick up, what room you're in, without once ever being in the room with you. There was a clip going around recently that I kept coming back to because it said something I'd been circling for years in about 15 seconds. Somebody had cut together a fake dungeon crawl, every beat of exploration interrupted by an invisible companion narrating the solution before the player had finished looking at the puzzle. Inspect the carving. Try turning that wheel. The answer's probably on the door. None of it tied to one specific game, because it didn't need to be. Anyone who's played an open-world title in the last decade recognized the rhythm immediately. That's the whole complaint in miniature. The dungeon stops feeling like discovery. It starts feeling like following instructions read aloud by someone standing just outside the frame. The one that usually gets me is Borderlands. Borderlands put a voice in your ear before most games figured out how to do it badly, and somehow that just meant Borderlands had more time to refine how terrible it could be. Whoever's talking through your echo device at any given moment knows what you've killed, where you're standing, what you're looking at, what you should pick up next. There is no version of the fiction where that character has eyes on you at all times. The game has just decided you'd rather be told than wonder. Horizon does the same thing through Aloy, except Aloy is doing it to herself, and the real examples are funnier than anything I could have invented. Players have clocked her narrating a single mountain climb almost in real time. There's the mountain. Halfway there. Almost there. Made it. All inside about 30 seconds, as though the player might forget what they're doing if she stopped talking for a breath. There's a worse version of this too, where she'll comment on something specific in the environment, a pipe she expects you to climb. Except the ceiling is wall-to-wall identical pipes, and nothing on screen actually changed to tell you which one she meant. The line is supposed to help. Instead, you spend longer hunting for what she's talking about than you would have spent just exploring the room yourself. God of War Ragnarok got loud enough criticism over this that it's now a matter of public record than just my opinion. Two of the game's narrative leads later said the constant puzzle hints from Atreus, Mimir, and Freya were a complete oversight. Nobody on the writing side anticipated that players would mind. The feedback told them otherwise almost immediately. Sonny Suljic, the actor who plays Atreus, said in an interview that he gets sick of hearing his own voice because of how often the hints fire. The character's own actor wanted him to be quiet. Sony did eventually add an option on PC to turn the hint frequency down. Console players waited longer for the same fix, so the solution existed, it just wasn't the default, and it wasn't available everywhere at once, which tells you the original instinct, talk constantly, just in case, was never something the studio meant to question. It took the audience getting loud enough to be heard over the hints. Far Cry runs its own version of this through systems instead of a single voice, though it does appear a lot. Radio towers, outposts, regions that check themselves off out loud as you clear them. Year after year, game after game, until the open world starts to feel less like a place and more like a to-do list narrating its own completion. Ubisoft eventually pulled radio towers out of Far Cry 5 entirely, which is the closest thing to an admission you're going to get from a studio that size. They didn't say it out loud, they just quietly stopped doing it. And I don't say any of this to chastise the players who want the hints either. Accessibility is a real consideration, not a fig leaf, and when a studio shows up at a showcase and talks through the accessibility work in their game, I mean it when I say that it earns a nod from me. That includes yellow paint, for the players who need it, of course. The complaint isn't that the option should just disappear. The complaint is that it stopped being an option somewhere along the way and became the only setting on offer. None of these studios sat down and just decided to insult the players despite how you may feel. That's worth saying because, well, I believe it's true. What happened instead is smaller and just a little sadder. Somewhere in the process, helping the player became the easy default, and trusting the player became the thing that needed to be argued for a meeting for some reason. Most of the time, nobody made the argument. I think we've all felt this at some point, without having a name for it. A diary left behind by a fallen adventurer that reads like a tutorial. An audio log that conveniently divulges the boss's weakness in the next room. A journal that feels like it was written to be read rather than lived through, by someone who would not have been nearly so composed in the moment that they were supposedly writing it. System Shock gets the exception award here, at least by the time I was playing games, because it was early enough to understand the form before the form became a habit. A log left behind by someone who didn't know they were leaving it for another player. That's literally the whole trick. It has to sound like it was written for the person who wrote it. What happened after System Shock, and really during that whole 90s stretch, is that nearly every game with the corpse and a story decided audio logs, journal entries, and notes on the ground were the solution to telling that story without slowing down to tell it properly. And the logs started doing something logs shouldn't be able to do. They started narrating events as they happened, in full sentences, with complete information, delivered by people who, by any reasonable account, should not have had the time, the composure, or the reason to record any of it. Here's the version everyone's played. You know the game, even if I don't name it. September 2nd. We've started testing the virus on Subject 7. Initial observations are promising. Subject displaying elevated aggression, increased muscle density, and a concerning tendency to stare directly into the observation cameras. Management remains optimistic. September 3rd. Injected the second dose this morning. Subject appears healthy, perhaps too healthy. During routine inspection, it bent a reinforced steel restraint with one hand. Security assured me this is acceptable. I'm having doubts about this project. September 4th. We attempted additional behavioral testing. Subject did not respond positively. We poked him with a stick. He did not seem to like that. Security Chief Ryans resigned. I am assured everything is still okay. I am having a bad feeling about this. September 5th. Containment has failed. Subject escaped approximately 20 minutes ago. Laboratory C has gone silent. If anyone finds this recording, the override code for the security doors is 4471. The MasterCard key can be found beneath my desk. The prototype shotgun is hidden behind the vending machine. The creature's exposed chest cavity appears vulnerable to cryogenic weaponry. Fuel canisters located throughout the facility may be used to stun it temporarily. I have also left 6 additional audio logs throughout the facility detailing the origins of this project. Please collect them to fully understand what happened here. Now, I'm just going to be blunt. Nobody is going to record their final moments like that, I assure you. The narrative is so afraid of you finding information through actual gameplay, looking at a room and sensing it is wrong, that it would rather hand you a diary entry wearing a key code as a costume. To me, Halo 3 ODST did this the right way. The city itself follows the B-side character, Sadie, around as she searches the city. It's not a voice telling you where to go, it's literally the city telling you to slow down and look. Steam venting somewhere it shouldn't, an alert flickering on a sign. The kind of nudge you only catch if you're actually paying attention, leading you into an alleyway where you find the phone that she had just used moments before. That's good environmental storytelling. It feels like you discovered something. Like you legitimately stumbled onto something that existed before you had walked in. Bad environmental storytelling, however, feels more deposited, like someone set it down specifically for you 5 minutes before you had arrived. I believe anyway that most players can tell the difference, even when they can't articulate why a given note just feels off. It's not the content, it's the convenience. In the Dark Souls episode, titled Some Games Find You at the Right Time, I mentioned that Dark Souls doesn't tell you much of anything. It wants you to get lost. It wants you to check your inventory, your level, talk to the few NPCs willing to talk to you. It doesn't care whether you ever learn about its optional bosses or that their souls can be turned into specific weapons, or that some walls in the world aren't really walls if you're willing to hit one by accident. Yellow paint is the cleanest version of everything that I have been trying to tell you so far, dear viewer, because it's not subtle, and it doesn't pretend to be. A wall you can climb gets painted a different color than the walls you can't. A ledge gets a chalky white edge so that you know it's a ledge. The game has decided somewhere upstream of you ever picking up the controller that you are not to be trusted to look at a wall and just wonder. Here's the part that I think gets missed when people argue about this, and yes, people do argue. We are creatures of habit. Yellow paint doesn't actually solve the problems its defenders say it solves. The argument for it has always been some version of, well, without it, players will just get stuck, and a stuck player quits. Sure. But a stuck player was never going to stay stuck. They were going to Alt-Tab, or pull out their phone, open a wiki and search the puzzle on YouTube and watch somebody else's hand solve it for them. That player was leaving the game either way. Yellow paint doesn't rescue them from frustration. It just moves the moment of being told the answer from outside the game to inside it. Which means the only player yellow paint actually changes anything for is the one who wasn't going to look it up. The one who would have stood in front of that wall a little longer, tried the wrong thing twice, and then found the right thing on their own terms. That player didn't have a problem yellow paint needed to be solved. They had a game working as intended. Yellow paint takes that experience away from them to spare a frustration the other player was always going to route around anyway. It's not a small inefficiency, it's just a trade where the house always loses. You give up the discovery for the player who wanted it, and in exchange for nothing, because the player you were trying to protect was never going to stay inside the building. There's a part of this that actually makes me angry, if I'm being honest, instead of me just trying to act clinical. I mean, this isn't a hard problem to me, anyway. It was solved decades ago, by a game with a fraction of the budget and none of the modern tooling. Silent Hill let you set your combat difficulty and your puzzle difficulty separately. Not one slider standing in for both, the way most games still treat difficulty today. Two distinct decisions, because Team Silent understood that being good at combat and being good at puzzles are not the same skill, and a player shouldn't be punished on one axis for their preference on the other. That's the whole idea. It's not complicated, it just requires believing the player is allowed to know their own mind. And if you're going to tell me yellow paint is doing my problem solving for me, at least give me the choice to turn it off. Not because I think I'm better than the player who needs it, but simply because I just want the immersion back. Decades later, we're still watching players solve this themselves because the industry just forgot. God of War Ragnarok eventually got a PC option to dial down Atreus' hint frequency after the fact, after the complaints, on one platform before the other. Borderlands 3's dialogue was disliked enough that players went and edited their own config files to turn it off completely, just to get the version of the game where they were allowed to explore a room without narration. That's not a fringe complaint from people who hate fun, that's players doing the difficulty slider work themselves because nobody offered it to them. So when a game asks me to care about a character it hasn't earned, or announces the end of the world and then opens a fishing minigame for me, or paints the wall yellow because it's worried I might enjoy looking at it too long, I don't think the answer is that game design is hard. I think the answer is that trusting the player takes a kind of nerve a lot of studios have stopped being willing to spend. Silent Hill had it. A handful of others still do. Most don't, and they didn't lose the ability. They just stopped reaching for it. I don't have a list of easy fixes for this. I'm not going to pretend a closing chapter will solve design philosophy that the largest studios in the world have spent a decade treating as law. What I have is a question, and it's not mine to answer alone. Every time a game decides on your behalf what you needed to know, when you needed to know it, and how plainly it had to be painted out for you, it's making a bet. The bet is that you would rather be safely handled than allowed to wander. It bets that you value a frictionless checklist over an earned memory. Sometimes that bet is right, but most of the time, I don't think anyone in the room bothered to ask. So the next time a wall gets a sickly yellow gloss, or an invisible companion fills a silence you didn't want broken, or a diary entry reads like a tutorial instead of a human life, look past the screen. Ask yourself the only question this episode actually cares about. Not whether the game trusted you. Whether it ever stopped to wonder why it was so afraid of what you'd do if it did. I am Agis. Thanks for watching.